Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ornn's Kitchen, your home for the spiciest and jankiest Legends of Runeterra decks and content. Now, last episode, we did say that I would be moving to a every other week schedule for the podcast. Um, I do believe I am a week late. However, we got some excellent news today that we're going to be going over. We got our rotation information for this coming standard year. Now, we're going to be going over each of the rotated champions and cards and discussing what impacts those are going to have on the standard meta and what sort of decks we can actually potentially see pop up in between as a result of the rotation. Now, we don't know what cards will be getting released with the expansion quite yet. That will be happening later this week or next week. And so we won't know exactly what sort of decks will show up as a result of the brand new cards coming in, but we will be able to tell what sort of decks will show up as a result of just the rotation. Now, we're going to get started with the Runeterra champions that are getting rotated out. Bard, Rise, and the Cultist Darken champions Varus, Kayn, and Aatrox are all getting rotated out. Now, the reasoning for this was really interesting. They viewed the alt win-con type champions like Rise as they're better when they come in and out and aren't always standard legal. With Bard, Varus, Kayn, and Aatrox, it was more to help kind of break up the idea of these decks and just give standard a little bit of room to breathe. And actually, real quick, what we can do is check the Legends of Runeterra page. Give me just a moment and I'll pull that up. Okay, so we're now over to the rotation preview article, and we're going to kind of go over a little bit about the reasons for Bard, Kayn, Varus, Aatrox, and Rise rotating out. So the big thing is just having a strategy that's unique to an archetype and causes the opponent to kind of struggle with interacting with it. So this means Bard's Chimes, Aatrox World Ender, and Rise's World Runes. And this is basically just meant to help with keeping the game fresh. Now back over to the rotation. The next set of cards are the Bandle City cards getting rotated out. Champions are Fizz, Yuumi, Vhagar, and Heimerdinger. Now, a reminder that most Bandle City champions are also duo region, so these are also going to show up in the other regions, showing up as rotated cards. Now, one thing to note is most of these are going to be the support packages for cards that are getting rotated. So Fizz is you're going to see in the Bilgewater rotation a lot of stuff that just it's that Spellslinger archetypes that are getting rotated out. Yuumi, a lot of the attach support and cheap units that care about getting attached units to them. Vhagar's Darkness package is all getting rotated out, and Heimerdinger is getting rotated out as well. For this, let's see. Texture Champs, Fizz, and then Better Off Alone, the Breakup Champions. This is mostly just, honestly, this entire article is really interesting. We'll actually go from here and go over the article first, and then over some of the individual cards. So, some things never change unless you make them. These linear champs. So, as they show, Pike, Rek'Sai, Vhagar, Senna, Diana, Nocturne. These are champions whose deck archetypes and game plans are just going to be the same just about every single game. There's not really much difference in how they play, and it's just always going to be the same. Now, Lurk, Darkness, and Nightfall. These are the archetypes that have been around almost as long as they've been in the game. Lurk has been kind of the most standout option where they've been standard legal since they came out, and they've always had an incredibly large win rate for how little the deck has changed over the years. And the big reason why they're rotating these decks is uh, it's hard to design new cards that Lurk is going to want that aren't going to break other archetypes. And so they're seeing if rotating these archetypes out will help allow for better card design. And so we'll get a chance to see exactly what happens in the Eternal format going forward with these decks. Um, Now, they are bringing in Braum and Vladimir. And honestly, I think this is a fantastic option. Braum and Vladimir have always kind of been that base duo where they do kind of the same kind of linear game plan. However, the nice thing is that now that we have the Poro King and we can have a proper Poro deck, Braum has more options than just the Vladimir self-damage ping archetype that has been a big part of Braun Vladimir identity. And also with a lot of the new other additions of self-damage or just damaging all of your units that Freljord has had for a while, Braum will actually fit in really well with a lot of the Freljord archetypes that are ongoing right now. So Braum and Vladimir coming back into Standard are really interesting. And now that Vladimir has also had his rework, if we look at some of the other, I think we have, oh, I have to, let me, okay, we're actually going to go to runeterra.ar real quick, and I'm going to pull up the list of Noxus champions that are staying in the game. All right, so going into the next standard meta, we are losing, if I remember correctly, let's see, we are losing Riven, LeBlanc, Darius, and Vladimir, and getting, losing Riven, LeBlanc, and Darius, and getting Vladimir. That means standard legal champions will be Annie, Samira, Swain, Mordekaiser, Sion, and Vlad. Interesting. Okay. Yeah, because Draven, Katarina, Rumble are going to remain eternal legal. So this means that with the addition of Vlad, we will have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We will have 6 Noxus champions available. And it is going to be interesting to see what Vlad ends up being partnered with outside of Braum. Now, if we go out of Noxus champions, there aren't a lot of good options in terms of what will be sticking around. However, I could potentially see Jack as, or even an Ionia type package, because Ionia is getting a lot of their healing effects brought back in. Although, so there will be a lot of options once the update drops and we see what new cards are coming out. We'll do some exploration for what sort of Vladimir decks will be showing up. Now, for those of you who haven't been kind of keeping track of Vladimir or some of the Eternal changes, let me pull. So Vladimir has been updated to go from a just an attack drain effect to play effect to deal 1 damage to any number of allies and deal that much to an enemy, which means that he's actually really good for removal. And if we do see the usage of some of the self-damage archetypes that Bilgewater still has some access to, we could potentially see something like Chakram Dancer being paired with Vladimir, because Vladimir is a skill effect that Chakram Dancer would allow Vladimir to actually still drain off of the play effect. And so there will be some extra options for what we can see happen with Vladimir coming in. Now, as for the one of the other categories, the what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, needs improvement champs. So this is Lucian, J4, Tryndamere, Darius, Renekton, Kalista, Kayle. Going out, Thresh, Yasuo, and Vi coming in. Now, they have admitted that not every champion feels as strong as other champions, and especially in Eternal, where there is a much more drastic power difference in terms of which champions are good and which aren't. They feel like Standard moving back to a lower power level by rotating a number of cards out means that they will get to see potentially more play as with rather than in Eternal. And so they're hoping that these champions that are going back into Eternal will have a better opportunity to thrive and potentially experience some buffs, whereas in Standard, the ones that are coming in will just be able to work without needing much changes, if any. And so this is mostly these are the champions that are mostly out of Eternal because they're not quite strong enough to really survive the Eternal power level, and should thrive better in Standard. And the ones that are going out are ones that have been kind of held back from being able to be buffed because right now they're at a point where they're just good enough to see play or are on the fringe, but if they get buffed at all, then they would easily go over the edge into just overbearing. And so, next section is Heimerdinger, Gwen, Sejuani, Zed, and they're going out into Eternal, and Hecarim, Lulu, and Gangplank coming in. These are titled the Better Off Alone, the Breakup Champs. And these are champions that had just default pairings that if they just were brought in and their default pairings weren't rotated out, these decks would just be decks that have existed in the past and would just automatically exist again. And so they're breaking up the general pairings of these sorts of champions. Pulling out Sejuani and putting in Gangplank is interesting because we do have Samira still in Standard, which means we can actually potentially see proper Samira and Gangplank plunder archetypes. And so we'll probably see a resurgence of Samira decks because she'll have a better partner rather than Sejuani in Gangplank. And so we're going to get a chance to see some really interesting new decks that are coming in. Hecarim losing Zed as his usual partner, and a lot of the ephemeral package out of Ionia means that Hecarim will have to look for other ephemeral units. And one of the options that they point out is Hecarim Azir. And so it's going to be really interesting to see how these new decks get to come. Heimerdinger going out means that he's losing his best partner of Jace, or Jace is losing his best partner. And so this is the breaking up the problematic champion combos to try and reinvigorate some of the archetypes and push champions to look for other people to be paired with in region combos. So we'll get a chance to see some really interesting evolutions of decks in the new Standard format, especially depending on which champions we end up getting in the new expansion coming out in a couple of weeks as well. We already talked about the unexpected, the weird champs. They are bringing in Taric and Fiora. Now, Fiora has always been a kind of questionable champion because of her. If she manages to survive killing 4 units, she just wins the game. And so she's always led to a sort of interesting dichotomy of how good she can be. However, current design philosophy means that there's a lot more opportunity to interact with Fiora, whether it's if you're in Shadow Isles, being able to slay your own units to potentially kill Fiora or kill some of her allies and keeping her from striking. There's plenty of stuns. There's a lot of options nowadays that allow you to help keep Fiora from being able to actually kill your units. And so we'll get to see just how good Fiora is in the new standard meta game coming forward. Taric is one of the other champions they're bringing in. Again, it's kind of a similar situation where the support archetype hasn't ever really took off in Eternal, but seems like with it being a slightly lower power level in Standard, should be able to thrive a little bit better, and Taric would seem better at home in Standard rather than Eternal. But due to some of the other champions and gameplay and play styles that have been available in Standard for the last year, means that Taric just couldn't really be brought back in. So pulling a lot of those other archetypes out and bringing Taric in means that we'll be able to see a little bit more variety. Then next up is Goodbye Doesn't Mean Forever. We're losing LeBlanc, Fizz, Nami, Karma, Seraphine, Akshan, Pantheon. Honestly, these champions are the ones that I am the most glad to see gone. As someone who has played through the worst moments of Karma and Seraphine, they just outright lock a lot of interesting, competitive, dark deck archetypes just out of being viable. Because and this isn't to say that proper control decks don't deserve a place in Legends of Runeterra. It's just that the nature of how Karma and Seraphine work together by copying spells means that when you get to the point, there is no possibility of counterplay. Now, as someone who also plays a lot of Magic the Gathering and enjoys control archetypes in Magic the Gathering, Magic the Gathering has a much stricter, or it's harder to load up your deck with so much control that your opponent doesn't have any possibility of slipping in some sort of win con underneath the moments that you tap down or run out of mana. Whereas in Legends of Runeterra, there's never a point where you're truly punished for passing a turn and leaving mana unused because of the fact that you can bank spell mana. And so it gets harder to slip in under these control decks because there's not ever really a moment where you can kind of force them to use the remaining mana before it goes back to their turn. And the biggest problem with that was these control decks, because their champions generate all of their control effects as well, especially in the Karma and Set combo decks, which are the most problematic, there was never a moment where you could feel comfortable forcing your opponent to burn mana. Because if you force your opponent to burn mana, they didn't care. That meant that there was no pressure. And part of this actually stems from the fact that Magic has the end step. And when you don't, and at the beginning of each turn, everybody gets all of their mana back. And it just means that control archetypes in Legends of Runeterra have a harder time being properly balanceable. Although, looking at how Magic the Gathering has kind of gone through ebbs and flows of where control is overbearing or super strong, and kind of right now in a lot of older formats where control just doesn't really exist, it's interesting to see that it'll be interesting to see what sort of control deck options show up now that the kind of big control deck champions of Heimerdinger, Seraphine, Karma are no longer in Standard. And so the typical idea of I'm going to just keep destroy anything you play, have Notify or Deny up to be able to counter your big Haymaker spells, and basically continually draw cards and then just be able to obliterate your biggest unit with Karma Set, or just constantly have Darkness and generate these turrets and just aggro units that you can't really do anything about. So it'll be interesting to see how the idea of control in Legends of Runeterra evolves in Standard with the loss of these champions that have in the past been the control champions. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing because almost every competitive player that played through Karma Ezreal and the Seraphine set and Karma set metas in tournaments would tell you that those decks were not fun to play against. And it was always a good thing that they never had a higher than 50% win rate. Because if they ever got good in the general player metagame and on the ladder, it would result in a format for the general public that was not fun to play and would drive people away from Legends of Runeterra. And now that Standard does not have any risk of those champions creating that sort of atmosphere, I think overall the format will be better. Now, LeBlanc is one of those champions where she's always struggled to find a place because removal has always been right at that sweet spot where it can very easily take care of her and keep her off the board from being able to do anything. But if she ever levels up, and especially with the reputation decks, the LeBlanc Ashe decks, the ability for LeBlanc to easily kind of prey on the vulnerable and frostbitten units that the LeBlanc Ashe deck would create meant that LeBlanc always was kind of an overbearing unit. If you didn't have some way to stop her immediately, she could very easily overrun you, especially when paired with frostbite effects that would keep your units from being able to trade into create the proper gameplay pattern that LeBlanc should be playing. Because LeBlanc, as a 3 mana 5/2, I mean, it wants to be constantly on the aggressive and then not able to, like, basically playing as can't block. However, the frostbite effects in Freljord meant that when you moved out of your offense turn when you had the attack token and moved on to your defense turn when your opponent had the attack token, you would have your mana up to be able to frostbite any potential unit that had less than 5 health or less, and throw LeBlanc in front of it to kill them. And it was always going to be a better trade of your mana on defense by frostbiting a unit that was attacking in, and it meant that you could never feel comfortable attacking into LeBlanc, when you should actually be able to feel very comfortable trading into LeBlanc. And that is more of a process of people finding the best way to take advantage of the way regions combine to offset champion weaknesses. And it made it to a point where LeBlanc was a bit too good when paired with Freljord, and so LeBlanc getting pulled out, I think, again, leads to a better, healthier state of the game. Fizz and Nami. Fizz has been a very problematic, elusive, basically elusive champion, incredibly hard to remove because it's very easy for Bilgewater to keep a couple mana open, to always have a fast or burst speed spell to be able to keep Fizz from being able to be killed. There's not enough sharp sight as a keyword. And this kind of leads more into an interesting dichotomy on how these types of elusive keywords are treated between Legends of Runeterra and Magic the Gathering. In Magic the Gathering, the closest equivalent to elusive is flying. Now, there also exists a keyword in Magic the Gathering that is similar to sharp sight in Legends of Runeterra, and that is reach. The dichotomy comes from the fact that Magic the Gathering has flying in easy access of just about all 5 colors, except green. However, green has the most ways to directly answer flying, because green has, as part of its color identity, the ability to just straight up destroy flyers. They do also happen to have the highest keyword or amount of units with reach, which is the keyword that allows them to block flyers, even though they don't themselves have flying. Um, and this means that out of the colors with the most common access to flying, white, blue, and black, there are plenty of enough answers between green and red and enough other flyers that exist to be able to easily make sure that flyers never become a problematic keyword where they end up overtaking an entire metagame. And Magic realized this very early on, where before they even keyworded reach, they had it written out similar to Sharpsight, where they can block with flying, and they knew that in order to keep flyers from being too good, they would always have to be flyers had to be worse stats for their cost, and there had to be enough other flyers across other colors and enough answers to flying, then reach and destroy target flying creature, to keep those units from ever being too overwhelming. Now, you do still see plenty of flyers here and there show up as playable cards throughout competitive Magic the Gathering. However, in Legends of Runeterra, Elusive does not have that same development. Elusive is not as widely available. It is usually focused in 2 of the 10 regions, and Sharpsight is not widespread enough to be able to counter Elusive as a strategy. And so, Elusive units tend to be, even though they are never very big, they always tend to be problematic enough that when Elusives get good, or pump effects that allow Elusives to get strong enough, it means that there isn't ever a proper recourse, and the public perception of Elusive as an archetype is that it is too frustrating to play against to really enjoy it as a part of the meta. And while we have seen Sharpsight now keyworded and are likely to see more Sharpsight show up on units in the future, it will take more time for elusive units across more regions to show up, and Sharpsight as a resource to show up across more regions as well. Because as of right now, it is mostly restricted to a couple Demacia units and cards and a Freljord unit. And if we want Elusive to be a healthier part of the metagame and design of Legends of Runeterra, we will need to see Sharpsight show up in more than just 2 of the 10 regions, and Elusive to be a little bit more widespread, and make sure that Elusive units are worse costed than equivalent units of the same stats. And right now, there's not quite enough of that costing difference to warrant, to help balance elusives from the metagame as a health perspective. And so Fizz getting rotated out alongside Yuumi does mean that we will get to see a standard metagame where there is not enough strong elusive support to mean that there will be a strong elusive aggro deck as part of the metagame going forward. Nami is getting rotated out as part of the Spellslinger packages, just because Spellslinger archetypes have in Legends of Runeterra have been historically very difficult to balance around. That's real karma. It's just Waves Hello. Even though Nami got her rework and was in a fairly balanced state afterwards, they just couldn't allow the Spellslinger archetype in Bilgewater to ever get to a point where it felt good enough to play as or against in the standard metagame to allow Nami to really be good. And Eternal's higher power level means that Nami should be able to find a little bit better of a home, especially if she is allowed to get above. Akshan and Pantheon. Akshan has always been just kind of that generically good Shurima champion. And seeing him rotated is kind of sad, because this leaves Shurima's champions. Actually, let's go ahead and look at Shurima's champions. This will leave, in Standard, Shurima with Azir, Nidalee, Sivir, Kai'Sa, actually, just Standard for right now. This will be Azir, Nidalee, Kai'Sa, Talia, Nasus, and Sivir, which honestly is a really good spread. I would actually expect to see Nidalee kind of move into the archetype of the just generically good Shuriman champion. And I'm not sure if that's quite enough. And it points to a fact that Shurima as a region has been lacking just enough of an identity that makes it hard to really make the decision to dip into Shurima as your secondary region. And now, granted, Sivir coming back does help a little bit, but you'll notice that this will mean that the cheapest Shuriman champion will be Azir at 3 mana. Everyone else will be Azir at 3, Nidalee at 4, Kai'Sa, Sivir, Talia at 5, and Nasus at 6. This means that if you want to go into Shurima, you're going to want to be playing a deck that has a strong suite of early game units that can kind of handle the brunt until you can get out your champions on turns 4, 5, 6, 7. And it will be interesting to see what sort of decks pop up, utilizing what tools will be left in Shurima to create those sorts of decks. Now, overall, Akshan, I think, has been problematic because Akshan has always struggled to encourage anything other than just value. Oh, you target your stuff, value. You manage to get in some good attacks, just extra value. And so Akshan, I think, has been the main reason I think Shurima has not really been allowed to flourish as a region. Because any good Shuriman cards just innately make Akshan that much stronger. Any sort of good crowd or control effects or boosting effects just make Akshan better. And Akshan as a 2-mana 2/2 quick attack was already very hard to control as is, and him being rotated out, I think it will be better for Standard. And considering that the next expansion will be including Silas, and most likely an Ishtal champion, which will be part of Shurima. I would personally like to see Rengar because I think Rengar, Nidalee, ambush type effect pairing would actually be really nice. But I have a feeling we're almost certainly getting Silas. The chains and Morgana and a lot of the stuff that we got out of the last expansion just really points towards Silas being almost a guaranteed champion coming out in a couple weeks. An Ishtal champion, which will be Shurima. I think we'll see some interesting potential for Shurima as a region, especially if we get someone like Kiana or Milio, who will almost certainly have elemental support, and turn Shurima into the other elemental region, and make it so that the elemental decks in Bilgewater will have, do they go with Freljord for all of the Volibear stuff, the lightning and ice, or do they go into I think Piltover with Janna's wind-based stuff, or do they go into Shurima with the Ishtal support package? And so I think it'll open up a lot of diversity with Shurima if they do decide to do an Ishtal champion that is focused on elemental-focused synergies. Pantheon getting rotated out is more a statement on the Fated package. Fated was one of those archetypes that just never did as well as it should have. Um, and I think Pantheon will work better in Eternal, where there is more efficient boost effects, and there's the potential for them to find time and space to rework Pantheon into a more usable champion. Now, especially with the Fated keyword. And part of that comes down to it is really hard in Legends of Runeterra, to commit all of your resources onto a single unit. And the way Fated plays makes you want to commit all of your resources onto a single unit turn after turn after turn. But then, once you lost your Fated unit, you lost out on all of the mana that you invested in that unit. And now, I think they had a really good idea on trying to kind of minimize that sort of downside with the Last Breath Fated unit that gave you back the first 3 spells that you cast on that Fated unit. And Fated falls into almost the same category as auras in Magic the Gathering, where in Magic the Gathering, auras are a type of permanent that is used to enhance a single unit. However, once the unit died, the aura also just went to the graveyard. It was similar to basically any sort of instant sorcery in Legends of Runeterra, basically any card that you use on a Fated champion that makes it stronger. And the problem was, and continues to be, that in most cases, just removing the unit that just had the aura on it always ended up resulting in your opponent getting the better end of the deal, where the Fated unit, or the unit with an aura on it in Magic, you spent the mana on the unit itself and then the mana on the aura, and you got nothing for it. Whereas all your opponent had to do was just spend the mana to remove the unit, and they not only removed the unit, but also the aura. And in the case of Fated units, if you use anything other than a burst speed spell to enhance your Fated unit, your opponent could very easily, in response to your fast or slow speed boost effect on your Fated unit, use something that would allow them to kill your Fated unit, and you would lose out on not just the mana you spent on the Fated unit, but also the mana you just committed for the slow or fast speed spell that was now getting neutralized on the stack. And that play pattern, where you get nothing for it, has always resulted in Fated feeling as a failed mechanic. And part of that comes down to Fated units need to have something other than just Fated. They need to have, in my opinion, either Last Breath, draw a card, or some other Last Breath effect that means that you get some sort of reward if your opponent removes them. And I would like to see Pantheon in Eternal get a little bit of rework along with this package to allow that to occur, to help make it so that these Fated units feel better to play, and it feels better to invest the extra mana that it takes to make these Fated units strong turn after turn, where it feels okay to invest your resources into these Fated units. And because the Fated units have never felt good to invest your time and effort into, Pantheon, as a result, has always struggled to find a place. When he was good, he was overbearing. But since he hasn't been good, he's just never seen play. And that's a shame, because I do like the idea of buffing up these single units to be these really strong, powerful units. And I think we got that better with Kale and the Empowered package. And I would like to see more of the Fated units have like fall into the empowered category where they also have a slight bonus of empowered. Like empowered, like even the common ones have them just empowered two, like for the one drop, that the 1 mana 1/1 faded. Have it have empowered three, last breath, draw a card, or something similar that like or that Targon would be able to have access to, like last breath stun the strongest enemy unit, something along those lines that allows these faded units to feel better to invest your resources into, that makes it so that you don't feel like you're losing everything when you after you've committed a resource to those units. Um, so now we are getting Aphelios and Sivir back. I think these are just fine champions to bring back. Aphelios as an interesting Nightfall Spellslinger type champion for Targon is a really interesting gameplay, especially since we are losing Diana as the premier Nightfall champion. And so I think, uh, especially in a far more limited environment, since we are losing a very large number of champions, I think almost every region is losing at least 3 or 4 champions. I think Aphelios will be just fine in Standard. Um, I think he was one of the best Eternal champions because the card pool and champion pool is just so wide, and there's plenty of ways to ensure that you always get to trigger his Nightfall. You get to benefit off of creating his weapons, and there's just but in Standard right now, especially with the fact that none of his typical support packages or like support champions are getting rotated in with him, I think Aphelios will be really interesting and will be kind of be the kind of go-to generic good stuff sort of champion that Akshan actually had in last year's Standard. Um, and then they have some more teasers. So in as a result, so with that all being said, the champions that are getting rotated out. Um, oh, where was Ari as part of the champions getting rotated out that they mentioned in the article? Um, oh, goodbye. Doesn't nope. Let's see, Embrace the Unexpected. Better Off Alone. Doesn't nope. I guess they just looks like Ari just wasn't included as in any of these categories. My opinion, I think Ari goes in the was it doesn't kill you, makes you stronger than needs improvement champs, or the some things never change the linear champs, because Ari's game plan of recall, replay, um, it was always just kind of awkward. So, anyways, Bandle City, we're losing Fizz, Yumi, Vagar, Heimerdinger. Now, as for cards, Bandle Tellstones is getting pulled. Actually, they do have another article that covers all of the cards. Just go ahead and pull that up. Rotation full list. Okay. Um, let's see. Um, okay, yeah, and the two Legends of Runeterra Invitational winners last month, they got to rotate a card into Standard or out of Standard. Boulevard rotated Mage Seeker Jr. out. And Ayano Guerra rotated Ballistic Bot into Standard. Let's see. These are going to be all the cards that remain in Standard. Oh, I was hoping that this would just have a list of all the cards getting rotated out. So let's go down. Okay, yeah, those are all those cards that are staying in Standard. Okay, so these are the cards that are currently in Standard that will be rotating out. If I remember, actually, I think I saw all of the Tellstones getting pulled out. Yes, all of the Tellstones are getting rotated out of Standard. I think this is a fantastic change. The Tellstones were, I think, a fantastic concept. After seeing how good Three Sisters was for Freljord, they expanded that over to the Tellstones for all 10 regions. And at the time, they were an excellent way to allow cards that wouldn't normally be played or main decked in a deck, especially since the way that Legends of Runeterra handles best of three matches means that you don't have a sideboard like games like Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Magic the Gathering, where if you want to be able to have some cards that are good in some matchups but not others, it means that and a lot of times you're making a risk of playing a card that is just never going to be playable. Whereas the Tellstones, generally, with the three options that they provided, would ensure that if you drew the Tellstones, there would always be at least one of those three options that was usable at any time during the game for basically a one mana tax. Um, and I think as a way to help expand the idea of having a better diversity of cards to be able to handle a larger suite of situations, I think the Tellstones were a fantastic option. However, I do think that uh, Legends of Runeterra has evolved to a point where having cards that are too generically good in any region, is just bad for the health of the game. And that comes from the fact that too often I see people look at newly revealed cards or just cards in general and go, why would I ever want to play this? It would be a dead card in too many matchups. And they're just going to go with a card that is more generically powerful, so something like Trinket Trade or uh, Yordle Portal, or the ability to randomly create or manifest a card that in most cases is just going to be better than these more niche cards that could potentially have a fantastic swing to your matchup in favor of cards that are going to provide more options. And I think Legends of Runeterra works best, especially in a competitive environment, when options are a bit more limited. And you really have to think about proper design of your deck to take advantage of what limited resources and options you have to play around uh, your opponent's cards in general. And so I think seeing the Tellstones move, out of standard and into eternal is a good change. Now, um, Shark Trainer um, just hasn't ever really been a good card. Um, most of these are just parts of packages for any of these cards. So like Stilted, like the Darkness package, some of the just general multi-region type cards for like Tristana are getting rotated out. Um, we are seeing some of like so Paper Tree is from like the Yumi package. We're seeing some of the Cultist package that's getting rotated out. Blooming Cultist, Sudden Surge. We're seeing some of the just generic burn that Riot has kind of moved out of Vandal City's region. Part of the Bard package is getting pulled for Bilgewater's. Most of this stuff is like attune cards, Spellslinger type cards for as just part of triggering Fizz and Nami. A lot of Lurk. I am interested. Like I do think it is kind of weird to see some certain of these cards getting rotated. Um, Beast Below, um, seeing it getting rotated, I think is interesting because part of me was curious to see if they're just rotating it as part of the just kind of helping trim down on the stat efficiency of Bilgewater units, um, and trying to kind of push Nautilus and Deep Decks into slightly less efficient units. Um, Playful Trickster, that's just part of the Fizz package. Jailbreak, part of the Nami and Spellsinger type package. Riptide, um, this is just part of the rotating champion spells out of standard and just leaving them as only accessible as the champion spells. Um, this is fine. Again, some of the cultist package. I am really surprised to see Eye of Naga Kerberos being rotated. Um, I think with Neela's draw package, I think Eye of Naga Kerberos is fine getting rotated. However, I worry if this means, along with a couple other, uh, actually, is Eye of Naga Kerberos the only? Uh, it looks like that Eye of Naga Kerberos is actually the only card that is part of Ilawi's spawn package that is getting rotated out. So, and I think it's actually fine. Ilawi has plenty, and her package has plenty of ways to generate tentacles that do not necessitate a focus speed card advantage unit spawning card as part of the package. And I think limiting just outright draw two that does not have the inherent risk of fleeting, which is what they have kind of moved most of Bilgewater's draw into. I think making sure that all of Bilgewater's draw effects are fleeting draw effects is better for the region in terms of its mechanical identity. So I think I have Nageke Burros is perfectly fine to see it rotating out. Um, Telstone's more of the Attune package. Fleet Admiral Shelley. Oh, this is so nice that it is finally just gone. Um, that me like it is just, Fleet Admiral Shelley has been a problematic card for standard pretty much forever. They have nerfed him. They have nerfed a ton of cards around him, and it will be interesting to see if they go ahead and revert some of those buffs or nerfs. I think that a 5 mana 3/3 that can buff all other units on board permanently. Um, I think that is a fine stat line. And I think Fleet Admiral Shelley should not receive any reversions to any nerfs that have hit him while he is in Eternal. Especially since Eternal has a lot more spell slingy support cards that would allow him to thrive just fine. More of the Lurk package. Um, it is interesting to see Monkey Business is really good to see going. Outer Pandemonium, really good to see going, especially since they're bringing back in Gangplank. Um, Limiting some of the plunder payoffs is, I think, really important. This also means that Powder Pandemonium will likely be able to see some of the nerfs that it has been hit with reverted, although I think that is slightly unlikely, especially because it is possible to get to a point in the game where you can. This is basically a deal 6 to the enemy nexus and potentially kill some enemy units. Um, and so its efficiency is just something that I don't think needs to be changed. Um, Losing the Siren is interesting because this will be, I think, the first time that a champion's boat will not be legal in the same format as the champion itself. Um, I don't think, honestly, I think the Siren would be better if it was just reworked and was still kept in standard, especially since Misfortune is staying in standard. I think that the Siren, if it was a 5 mana, uh, 2/5, draw the Misfortune, and just inherently made spells and skills deal an extra damage, um, and I think it would be far more playable rather than it needing to be attacking in order to get all of the boosts to the skills and spells. Um, but we'll see if they do any changes to the Siren while it's an Eternal. Um, but otherwise, nothing here is really outrageous, especially since a lot of it is just lurk package and spellslinger packages. Demacia. Honestly, nothing too crazy. Lucian's champion spell. Um, I Towering Stonehorn, I think, is interesting to pull out, especially since there's a lot more emphasis for things like Avalanche and uh, the Shadow Isles kill an ally, deal 3 or 5 to an enemy. I think Towering Stonehorn is a card that would actually be able to see more play in Standard, especially with all the other things rotating out. However, there is also a possibility that due to the nature of so much removal in Standard being damage focused, means that Stonehorn would be a card that would be much harder to deal with, um, especially with a lot of Demasia's other defensive profile options. Um, so, um, otherwise, mostly stuff that's not too crazy. There's a few cultist cards getting rotated. Champion's Strength getting rotated is fantastic. Champion's Strength has always been uh, too good at what it does, at being able to end games and just pressure your opponent, even if because +4/+4 basically guaranteed your units would always be able to trade favorably with anything your opponents had out on the board. Um, I am surprised that they're rotating out Fish Fight from the Weapon Master package. This is a direct nerf to Jax Dex and Vayne Tex, which is surprising, especially considering Vayne Aatrox is no longer going to be available in Standard. But I think they're probably trying to help make sure that Jax Ornn, which is a deck that is staying in Standard, just does not outright start off as the strongest deck in the format. Um, Otherwise, um, mostly just support packages from for Lucian, Quinn, and J4. Petricite Broadwing getting rotated out, I think, is also a very good thing. Them rotating out a number of cards from the Galio package, I think, is really good. It helps keep the Galio Morgana deck from getting too overbearing, and Petricite Broadwing was one of the most efficient units in the game, um, and was just honestly too good for its mana cost. And it being rotated out, I think, is a good way to help slow down and help allow other decks to properly threaten and fight against the Galio decks that are currently the top of the meta. Freljord, we are losing Udyr, Sejuani, Tryndamere. Udyr finally getting rotated out is interesting. They specifically kept Udyr in Standard last year because they felt that Udyr was one of those champions that should have been better in the lower powered format. And he just never really found a place to thrive, even with the new card that just got released as part of the variety patch a couple months ago. Bethany, he just could not manage to find his footing. And I think that Udyr in Eternal, where there will be a little bit stronger of an option to buff him up and make his stances just a little bit stronger, I think will be better for him. Um, Now, Sejuani getting rotated. This is to help encourage other plunder archetypes to come to the forefront. We already saw a lot of Samira Fizz decks, but we never got a chance to see a good Samira like plunder deck outside because Sejuani was just a bit too slow. The Freljord plunder effects were a bit too slow, and with them rotating Gangplank in, um, them rotating Sejuani out to help make sure that Gangplank and Sejuani just doesn't become the best plunder deck, and allowing Samira Gangplank to have an opportunity to be tried out and tested to see if it's a good plunder archetype, I think is really nice. Um, Otherwise, some cultist effects. I am cracking ice has always been basically unplayable. It's been one of those cards that seems like it should be really good, but just most cases you're going to want to frostbite the unit just for that turn rather than the next turn. Um, I am surprised to see Harbinger of Thralls and Succumb to the Cold and a lot of the Thrall cards getting rotated out, especially since Lysandra is staying in. It means that my guess is that they are looking to move Lysandra away from Thralls and potentially into other potential archetypes. Um, because, yes, if you look at Freljord standard level cards, yeah, we are keeping Lysandra because we're only losing Udyr and Sejuani and Tryndamere. And so Lysandra being one of the only ways to generate a Thrall, and there not being any of the other ways to help accelerate Thralls, means that Lysandra will be a slightly different deck rather than just depending on Thralls. Now, the fact that Lysandra does still enjoy like Titanic units, mostly 8-cost Titanic units, um, means that we will likely see potentially more like Lysandra Volibear type decks, maybe Lysandra Elder Dragon. Um, so we'll see how things shake out, especially since Lysandra is losing kind of her primary archetype of Thralls. Um, Three Sisters, it's the Freljord Telstones, it getting rotated out is really good. Seeing that Entomb is getting rotated out, that is Lysandra's champion spell. Um, so that means that if you want any of these sorts of obliterate into a frozen tomb effects, you are going to have to be playing Lysandra, especially since we're losing Buried in Ice as well. And we are losing War Mother's Call. This means that ramp decks will be more focused on things like getting to Volibear or Elder Dragon or Aurelion Soul. Um, so I think we are like the direction that Freljord's archetypes are moving into, I think is really interesting. Now, what I think is interesting is seeing Bone Scryer getting rotated out when Braum and Vladimir are getting rotated in, and the Scargrounds that are getting rotated in, I think is um, interesting. But I do agree with the choice by kind of limiting which cards for the Braum and Vladimir package are coming in, and those that are still in the standard and are getting pulled out will help make sure that the decks aren't just the same as what they were before the very first rotation. And so I think a lot of these changes are actually really good. Um, Starlight Seer or Starlit Steer getting rotated out is interesting. Avaros and Hearthguard, that's going to be a huge uh, uh, hit to the Ash LeBlanc decks, but considering LeBlanc is also getting rotated out, Ash LeBlanc is just not going to be an archetype anymore. Otherwise, most of this is just Plunder archetype for Sejuani and just a few other cards. So all in all, Freljord, I think the only really interesting thing about the Freljord rotation is the loss of the Thrall package. Um, so, like we'll still have Boromir, the one that summons two Thralls and advances them down to two. Um, we'll still have that. Um, I don't. So I don't. It's interesting to see like what'll happen with like Lysandra, but otherwise I think things are fine. Um, Ionia. These are some interesting changes. Ari. So we're losing out on Shimon Wind, and like the stuff is that was a part of the kind of being able to recall and summon the same allies over and over again. Um, I think Shimon Wind is actually a really big hit. Visayan Disciple was a big part of elusive aggro decks. Um, it was also one of the easiest ways to trigger Kennen. Um, Kennen is staying in standard. However, Kennen is losing access to a lot of his best support cards with Ari. And and honestly, the Black Flame is one of the other big cards that really helped ensure that Kennen could have the potential to level up quite easily. However, I do think that again this is a good thing overall because it means that people will be forced into exploring some of these champions that have been so locked behind being partnered with very specific champions, Hecarim and Zed, Kennen and Ari, that they will start looking towards potentially finding other champions that could still help easily satisfy their level up conditions. Um, I think Hecarim Azir is really interesting, and I know Kennen Azir will also be, in my opinion, quite easy to trigger Kennen's level up because it's very easy to summon 5 Sand Soldiers. Honestly, even by like turn 3. Um, so I think we'll see some interesting, quite a bit of experimentation in a couple weeks with rotation. Um, Cultist getting rotated, some of the other recall effects getting rotated, Ionian Tellstones getting rotated, that's fine. 9 lives, the last burst speed effect that could generate a blocker. Um, Honestly, I think it getting rotated instead of it getting nerfed to focus speed is good. I think 9 lives should deserve to stay as a burst. A 4-2 unit is pretty easy to trade with, especially since there's always the ability to have priority once blockers are declared for the attacker to uh, potentially handle things if they want to try and keep their units. Um, Syncopation, um, lots of some recall effects. They're pulling out some of the dragons. Concussive Palm getting rotated. I think this means that there is actually going to be far less stun and recall effects available for Yasuo to play around with. Um, I think this will mean that Yasuo will have to look a little bit harder into other regions for support rather than just being able to depend on all of the tempo plays that have been available in Ionia. Otherwise, Greenglade Duo getting pulled as part of the ephemeral package with Zed, I think is fine. Um, Ghost, 1 turn elusive, I think that's good to be pulled. All in all, I think all of these the rotations for Ionia are strong, or I think they're perfectly valid to be rotating out. I am sad to see Black Flame go, but otherwise, I think everything is fine. Concussive Palm getting rotated out. Um, I think that leaves Homecoming as one of the only options left for recalls and stuns outside of a couple uh, skill-based stun or recall units that are available in Ionia. Um, let's see. Noxus. Riven, LeBlanc, Darius getting rotated out. Savage Reckoner getting rotated out. I think this is actually a good thing to see one less Titanic unit in the pool for the uh, Titanic spell in Freljord, where it just summons two random Titanic units. Having one less Titanic unit in the pool is a good thing, especially one that's just a pretty boring but quite playable Titanic unit. Um, Whirling Death, mostly stuff that was part of the Tellstones. Cultist, a couple Weapon Masters. Lord Broadmane. Whew. I think this alone, Lord Broadmane alone, will have huge ramifications because this means that Nora control decks that have depended on Vandal City's efficient pinging effects, um, whether it was Pokestick or anything else, the Pi or Pi Toss, any of those will no longer be an option. Um, I think this is probably one of the best rotation effects that they could do because there have been a large number of decks between Swain Nora, Elder Dragon Nora, um, Jin Nora, um, that have abused Lord Broadmane's ability to make your pinging removal just far too efficient at just killing enemy units. Um, and I think that removing Lord Broadmane from the ability to be played with the current pinging effects in Vandal City and in the game, I think are a is just a net positive. This will mean that, and honestly, this is the last card that really allowed control archetypes to exist. And so I think we will see a large number of changes that will be occurring in Standard, especially to control archetypes. And I think this also means that Shadow Isles will now be the region you have to include in order to have the hard removal in the game to just kill units. And I think that is a strength. Because for too long, Shadow Isles, before Mordekaiser was released in his support cards like Death's Grasp and all of those effects, it was too easy to just be like, oh, if I need efficient removal to be able to just remove my opponent's cards, I have Lord Broadmane decks to depend on. And so I think this is an excellent rotation. Incisive Tactician, also good to see it go. Disintegrate, getting just pulled out of the pool, only available through Annie's Champion spell, I think is fine. Most of the rest of this stuff is LeBlanc Reputation type cards and Reforge stuff for Riven's package. Otherwise, most everything is this is fine. Piltover's on. Seraphine is the only Piltover's on champion. We already discussed Heimerdinger a little bit. Most of Seraphine's package of generating new spells. Zonite Urchin going away is interesting. It is, especially since we're not seeing any of the other cards that care, like want to be discarded getting rotated out. So losing one of the cards that made it really easy to trigger the discard effects for the Jinx discard aggro decks, I think is really interesting. Production Surge, let's see. Um, Mostly stuff for the Heimerdinger package. Otherwise, there's not actually too much getting rotated. A lot of it is Caustic Rift getting rotated out is interesting. Um, I think honestly, seeing some of this like hyper efficient removal getting rotated out, I think is a good thing. Um, Actually, Gotcha getting rotated out, Aftershock getting rotated out is really interesting. Because this means that the only way to remove landmarks is by running the explorers. And this means that if you want to be able to handle Sunken Temple and other powerful landmarks, you have to make sure that you're including uh, explorers in your decks. Actually, was there? Okay, interesting. That means Noxus actually still has Scorched Earth available in Standard. At least I'm fairly sure that Scorched Earth is. Scorched Earth. Is it not tied in Scorched Earth? Oh, I have champions. Still selected. Okay, yeah, Scorched Earth is still in Standard, and it is still available. This means that unless you are playing Noxus and are running Scorched Earth, you will have to run the Explorers. I think that is a really good change. Um, because I think too many, especially with a lot of the other just generic efficient removal getting pulled. Um, Now, Piltovers does still have Mystic Shot. It does still have, um, actually, Mystic Shot might be one of the only spells it has available. Yeah, let's see. Let's actually pull it up. So, deal. All right. Oops, not Paradoxes. Okay, so we will have Divine Draft, which is slow speed. We will have Mystic Shot, Howling Gale, slow speed. We will still have Piltover Peacemaker, some Fumes, Blowback, and Rocket Barrage. Um, Actually, hold on. Standard. Yeah. So we'll have Divine Whirlwind, Shock Blast, True Shot Barrage, Rocket Barrage, Blowback, some Fumes, Piltover Peacemaker, and Mystic Shot. And Divine Draft and Howling Gale. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And half of those are going to be slow speed. Um, this means that it will be much harder for Piltover decks to be able to A, burn you out of the game, um, and because a lot of the burn effects that are being left in Piltover are to a unit and rather than anything, um, and it is going to be a lot more expensive on the whole. And uh, it's because a lot of it is now slow speed. Uh, it is going to be harder to interact during combat for Piltover and Zon. I think this is an excellent change. Otherwise, uh, most of this stuff is just pretty standard part of the packages of Heimerdinger or Seraphine that's just getting rotated out. Um, it is interesting to see just how much is getting pulled from. Oh no, some Fumes is getting rotated out. I missed that. That means we're going down to 9 removal effects in Standard for Piltover and Zon. And they don't. That's really strong, actually. Um, Yeah, no, this is hmm, yeah, no, that's really good overall. I actually like a lot of these changes. It means that Piltover and Zon won't be quite as strong as uh, has been in the past, and a lot of the losing a lot of the uh, easy discard outlets in Zonite Urchin, Timewinder, um, and some of the other cards means that even Jinx is going to have a little bit of a harder time uh, staying as strong as she has been over these last few weeks or last couple months. Into Shadow Isles, Callista, Vagar, Senna, Nocturne. So these are mostly just going to be part of these packages that are getting rotated out. Um, Kind of big thing to note, Opulent Foyer or Foyer getting rotated out is kind of a big deal. This was one of the reasons why uh, ephemeral decks were just so strong. Um, However, uh, bec- because they are returning Hecarim into standard, they need to cut down on the amount of ephemeral units that are easily available. Opulent Foyer was the strongest card that could just freely generate ephemeral units for Hecarim. Um, and so Opulent Foyer getting rotated out, I think, is just a huge way to help keep Gwen decks from being too strong, keeping Hecarim from being just overwhelmingly dominating. Um, and let's see, they're also let's see darkness packages, some of the free kill some of your own stuff as part of the Callista package. Um, they are like Spirit Leech is getting rotated out. That's going to also limit the amount of just card draw that Shadow Isles decks have access to. Um, Wings and Wings in the Wave getting rotated out. Wings in the Wave was by far the best unit for Shadow Isles to include in their deck to be able to fuel their kill an ally to deal damage to an enemy unit effects. By removing the Wings in the Wave, limits the amount of units that Shadow Isles will have access to as one drops that will want uh, that you will want to just throw away. Um, we are losing Crumble, Passage Unearned. Um, Not sure how I feel about Passage Unearned getting rotated out. Um, I think it was really important if Nora was going to be a strong part of the game, um, because Nora would be able to. Uh, this could obliterate. This also kind of card helped limit Deathless as an archetype, so I can see why it got rotated out. Sap Magic, I think that's technically Maokai's champion spell, so I can understand why that's getting rotated. Um, Undying rotating out. This is interesting. That's Rekindle. Ooh, Rekindler getting rotated out. That's also actually. This is interesting. They're rotating out a number of cards that helped keep Mordekaiser like playable. Like, yeah, Undying. Oh, this is going to be really interesting for Shadow Isles. Like, they still keep almost all of their removal. Like, they're still keeping Vengeance. They're still keeping um, all of the like kill an unit with power 3 or less, spend an extra mana to kill a champion with power like combined stats of like 4. Like, honestly, there's but losing Undying, Wings in the Wave, and the Rekindler, that's actually really big for uh, limiting the ability to use the removal of Shadow Isles, this means that you're going to have to actually be more willing to trade off units that were uh, you were more likely to actually use, like just kind of these throwaway units that are just easy chump blockers that you can then just trade in to sacrifice to fuel your spells. Shadow Isles, I think, might be taking just enough a hit from losing things like the Wings and the Wave and uh, the Rekindler that I think we might see Shadow Isles kind of fall out of favor as one of the decks being played. Akshan, Exile, Renekton. A lot of this is just Lurk package, some of the Ascended package, some landmark stuff that's getting rotated out. Promising Future was kind of a big part of like Akshan combo decks. Um, Shifting Sands getting rotated out. That's fine. Most of this is just losing Sandcrafter. Hmm. That'll It'll be really interesting to see what it will be left to build decks out of. Um, Most of the Shurima stuff is sticking around, which is actually really good. Um, Rock Bear Shepherd getting rotated out. Huh. Priestess of Desert Light getting rotated out. That's fine. Hmm. All in all, nothing too crazy. Curse of the Tomb getting rotated out. Yeah. Okay. Targon. Actually, let's see. Diana, Yumi, Pantheon. I had big tirade on Pantheon earlier. More Weapon Masters getting rotated out. Interesting. Um, yeah, Jack's Ornn is going to be taking quite a hit too. Kale getting rotated out. A lot of the Kale package. Um, Demonic bands or Draconic bands getting rotated out. That's interesting. Zolani getting rotated out, I think, is actually one of the biggest cards that will be having an impact to Standard. Because Zolani was the big reason why you played Targon Poro King. And with Zolani no longer being an option, you are going to have to look for other payoffs. And Braum coming back in to Standard and him being able to constantly generate the Overwhelm Poro means that I think Poro King will be going into just Freljord instead of Targon. And I think that is just because the ability to help protect your early game Poros, Frostbite, get a little bit more control, especially since Zolani is getting rotated out as your big finisher. Now, that being said, I don't know. Actually, let me let me do. Heart of the Fluffed is still in Standard, which means I think we might see Poro King decks switch over to uh, running Heart of the Fluffed as the finisher in Poro King decks rather than Zolani. Especially since you now have a strong second champion in Braum, and Braum can easily generate the Mighty Poros to give the Overwhelm effect to Heart of the Fluffed, along with Pouty Poro. So, that being said, it will be interesting to see if Poro King decks what they end up deciding to swerve into as their finisher for the archetype. Otherwise, some more Bard package, Cultist package, uh, some of the Faded package, Nightfall, uh, plenty of stuff. Zenith Blade getting rotated is interesting. I don't feel like Daybreak needed any sort of nerf, um, but helping keep decks slightly under control, I think is fine. And here are the cards getting rotated back in. Just uh, Lulu, going to be quite a bit of support package. We are getting Inventive Chemist, so we are getting a little bit more burn and some landmark effects. Um, Otherwise, Yordlesmith is getting rotated back in. Yordlesmith is not going to be in the same format as Poppy, so at least in Standard. I do think that Lulu Yordlesmith is a really strong combo because you can easily do Lulu, grow Yordlesmith up to a 4/4. Lulu then immediately grants, or Yordlesmith then grants Lulu quick attack, making Lulu safer to attack with. Um, Loping Telescope is coming back in. That's interesting. Hothead, I think, as part of like the support package with Lulu, Yordlesmith, will be really interesting. I do think that Hothead with will help as part of the Kaisa package will also be useful. Prowling Projectile, I think, is really good to be bringing in. It adds a little bit more ping effect into the uh, Bandle City package alongside Pytos. Um, Spirit Portal, I think the Jinx discard package has been running Bandle City for a while, anyways. I think Spirit Portal is a fine card to take the spot of some of the cards that are getting rotated out. Um, Otherwise, Yordle, Wizened Wizard coming back, I think is interesting. Um, Ember Monk coming in, also quite interesting. Um, see, otherwise, Gangplank's some of Gangplank's stuff coming back in. Um, I think Golden Narwhal I think is actually fine. Um, like I did stated in my tirade about elusives, I think as long as elusives have things like vulnerable or there are just more access to more elusive units across the regions, I think elusive is fine as a keyword. Ye Been Warned, also fine. Monkey Idol coming in. This means that will have both Monkey Idol and um, oh, what is it? It's part of the Ilawi package, but I can't remember the name. Buru Sentinel, I think. No, uh, no. Watchful Idol. Having both Watchful Idol and Monkey Idol in the same standard is really interesting, especially because you can do turn one Watchful Idol, turn two anything, and then turn three Monkey Idol. Um, and since Swain is still going to be in the format, just between those two cards, the constant countdowns on each of them means that that's going to be 10 damage, um, non combat damage towards Swain's level up. That is just going to be, you don't have to do anything about. Unless your opponent spends damage or removal on the idols, you're going to have plenty of ways to block it between your tentacles and the powder monkeys. Actually, the powder monkeys will trigger even more damage towards Swain's level up. So I have a feeling we'll see a resurgence of Swain decks, just purely off of Monkey Idol coming back into Standard. Double Up coming back, I think, is fine. Um, excuse me for just a second. Sorry, had to cough. Um, Dreadway. Um, I could even potentially see the potential for like a Gangplank uh, Jin deck, especially since the Dreadway doubles all damage dealt by spells, skills, and allies. Um, Potentially using the Dreadway as a finisher, but we've still got Riptide Rex in Standard, so I don't really think that's going to happen. But it's always a possibility. Um, Fiora rotating back in. A lot of the stuff is going to be part of the Demacia stuff that's rotating back in and will also be a part of her package. However, Dragon Chow is coming back, or is coming in, and Elder Dragon and Shyvana decks are already seeing some play and have been quite good for some time. And Dragon Chow means that you're just going to see just that little bit extra stats and extra progress towards leveling up Shyvana. Mage Seeker Conservator. Um, yep. Petricite Stag, I think, is absolutely fascinating card to be bringing in. A 3/5 that takes all damage for a supported ally, paired with Fiora that makes it very easy to ensure that Fiora gets an extra attack in. Seeing Golden Aegis come in, since we're seeing just the Lucian champion spell rally effect rotating out, and champion's strength rotating out, having at least one rally effect in Demacia coming back in just will be fine. Golden Aegis, again, I think is perfectly fine. Bright Steel Formation coming in, I think is excellent. Let's see, Braum coming in, the Scar Grounds archetype, a lot of that coming in. Tarkaz, Scar Mother, Ember Maiden, the Scar Thanes, the Reavers, like all of that is fine. Yasuo coming in. Surprisingly, we're not seeing a whole lot of the stuns coming in with Yasuo. We're just having Windswept Hillock and Yone. And actually, let's go ahead and check to see stun that are currently for Ionia. Actually, nah, we'll do all. So let's see. We'll have Guile still in. Falling Star. Shield Vault is getting rotated out. Dark Binding will still be in standard. So I mean, Facebreaker is still in. Wallop is still in. Cosmic Binding is. I don't remember seeing that as part of the Vandal City. That's getting rotated out. So I think Cosmic Binding might actually be staying in standard. Celestial Wonder, I think, is staying in. So I think in the past, where we've seen Yasuo partnered with Noxus, I think we might see it paired with Targon, with like Solari's Sunhawk, State, and Morgana, and have like Dark Bindings and Falling Stars and Facebreakers and those other sorts of stunning effects. Especially since we're losing a lot of other recall effects. Otherwise, Health Potion and Ritual of Renewal coming in. Health Potion, I don't think we'll see play. I do think it is a fine card. Ritual of Renewal, I do think we'll see some play because it is a basically 4 mana replace itself and heal something for 4. The 3 mana additional cost for that draw effect and the extra point of healing is, I think, fine. We are seeing a lot of the support cards from the Lulu package coming back. Green Glade Lookout, Fuzzy Caretaker. Kinku Lifeblade, I think, is interesting to see it coming in. However, a 4 mana 2/3 elusive, I think, is perfectly fine. Scattered Pod, draw a slow, fast burst spell. You do choose when you play what type of spell you draw. Windswept Hillock, Yasuo's draw. Let's see, Yone, Wind Chaser. It's fine. And actually, I think Yasuo, like Garen Morgana, will actually be fine because, especially with Windswept Hillock, that means every turn you're going to rally, gain stun the strongest enemy, strike with Yasuo. Vladimir, we're seeing some of the Crimson cards coming in. Noxian Guillotine is going out. Thorn of the Rose coming in. Arachnoid Sentry. So there's still some possibility that we see some Noxus um, pairing with Yasuo, but I think for the most part, since we don't have uh, as much as in Targon, I think Yasuo Targon will probably be the more likely combination. Survival skills, Shunpo, Captive Yeti. The V package, we're getting Thermogenic Beam back in. Okay, so we're losing quite a bit of burn, but we're getting Static Shock and Thermogenic Beam back in. Oh, we're getting Glorious Evolution back into Standard. Oh, that's going to be fun. Ooh, Hexcore Foundry back into Standard. Interesting. Especially since we just got the unit that all players draw one, but grants your opponent's card fleeting. I do think that Caitlyn, Teemo, and Traps will actually be quite happy to see another way to force your opponent to draw more cards in Standard. Flash of Brilliance is good. Igor Princess is great. Otherwise, Assembly Bot is interesting to see rotating back in. Haunted Relic is coming in, and with Callista gone, that's fine. It was really easy to take uh, bank your mana on turn 2, play Callista on 3, play Haunted Relic, and just immediately level up Callista. Basically, some more Hecarim package. Iron Harbinger is fine. Blighted Caretaker. Box is which is Thresh's champion spell. Well, I am surprised to see the box stay getting rotated in alongside Thresh. I would have expected them to just leave it out. Stirred Spirits, that's fine. Sivir, they are bringing back Shaped Stone. Interesting. I think that is actually really fine, especially since they're rotating out Akshan. Shurima does have plenty of ways to summon landmarks. I think Shapestone is fine. I kind of wish Shapestone cared if you currently had a landmark rather than just if you've ever summoned a landmark. And then they could probably put it back up to a +2/+2 if they did. Have it require you keeping a landmark on the battlefield, especially since Explorer is now there. They aren't bringing back Xerath, so I'm surprised that they're giving Rite of the Arcane, Rite of Passage. Okay. Some of the landmark support cards, I think, are potentially the reason to stay in or to go into Shurima now. Rite of Passage, being able to manifest landmarks that have been destroyed. Um, I'm I'm a little worried that some sort of Shurima Piltover control package with Sunken Temple might pop up, especially with Rite of Passage as basically a 2-mana way to get basically a 3-mana discount on Sunken Temple if it ever gets blown up. So I think this is probably going to be a card to look out for. I have a feeling it could very easily get nerfed quite heavily in Standard. Should Sunken Temple decks really take off. However, seeing Shurima's package, I'm not sure just how much concern needs to be a part of it. Otherwise, Desert's Wrath is nice to see coming back in. That'll be really nice for like Hecarim Azir or Kennen Azir. Aphelios and Taric packages, some of the support cards, Mountain Goat coming in, Frightened Ibex coming in. Otherwise, so all things considered, I think all of the things that are coming in and out are excellent. Now, all that being said, the state of the game with rotation. I think Legends of Runeterra PvP, the standard and eternal formats will be, or at least standard, because eternal has all cards available to it at all times. So um, eternal is going to be the same as it is. Standard, though, I think will be incredibly refreshing. We are losing, like I said, three champions from each region. Uh, in At least three champions from every region, and in most regions, uh, and in some yeah, almost every region is losing at least three. Um, well, not every region. So we're losing basically four Bandle City, but all of them are dual regions, so they're all overlapping with other regions. Um, Ionia is losing three. Shurima's losing three. Bilgewater's technically losing, well, two and a half with Fizz. Noxus is losing three. Targon's losing three and a half. Demacia's losing three. Piltover and Zon is only losing one and a half. But considering that all of the champions in Piltover are also losing like their common partners, because if we look at Piltover and Zon's standard champions, uh, we're keeping Teemo and Caitlyn. We're keeping Echo, Janna, Ace, and Jinx. Jace is losing Hibernator. Seraphine, and honestly, like, we're keeping Echo. Jinx is going to be pretty much sticking around. Teemo Caitlyn is going to be sticking around. Janna, like, I think overall, other than Jace, I think all of the current Piltover and Zon champions that are not getting rotated, um, they are going to just stay playable. Vi, I don't see where Vi will be coming in. I could see a Vi Janna deck pop up because Sunken Temple, allowing you to get the discounts needed on cards to be able to get Vi up to where she needs to be able to easily strike. I could see Vi being partnered with Demacia, where she will have access to uh, some strike effects or protection effects. Um, it is kind of up in the air to see what ends up happening with Vi. Otherwise, uh, I think there's enough rotating out from the current top tier competitor decks that almost all of them are taking enough of a hit that uh, they will not be rem- anywhere near as good as they were before rotation. Um, I think that all in all, uh, this rotation is a fantastic way to shape up the standard metagame and breathe a lot of new life into Legends of Runeterra. And so I think this is probably the best upcoming best time to be into Legends of Runeterra and be building decks. Because we will also be getting an expansion and at least three new champions and several new cards um, that are coming into standard. I cannot say for certain um, what sort of decks we will be able to build, um, but in 2 weeks, once we have seen the expansion um, and have an idea of what cards will be coming, uh, we will be able to have a lot of fun with the brewing up decks, testing things out, and just seeing how things are going. So, all in all, I think this is a fantastic time to be following Legends of Runeterra, and I am very excited for what is going to be happening in the next couple of weeks. So, yeah, that's the upcoming 5.4 patch with rotation. And in a couple of weeks, we'll be able to cover the new expansion cards, the new champions, and I believe, expansion comes out. Uh, let's actually check the calendar. Expansion comes out next Wednesday, and reveals start Tuesday, tomorrow. And so next Wednesday, so in 2 weeks, 29th, we'll have about a week of 5.4 being live. We'll be able to review the new expansion and see how things have shaped up and experiment with some decks for the season. So, all in all, I'm quite excited to see everything that's coming up this week and next week. So, in 2 weeks, on the 29th, I will see y'all there with all of the new cards, and we will have a ton of decks to brew and experiment with. So, thanks again for joining. Again, I'm Crazed Porcupine, your host with Ornn's Kitchen, and thanks again for joining in and listening in.